Welcome, one and all. Welcome to the Light 'em Up Lounge. Welcome to another very interesting show that I've been looking forward to for such a long time, because today is a special guest appearance, and we have a gentleman that has truly shaped the industry in many different ways and forms. And most recently, Nick Cutro has brought to the cigar world this wonderful book called Cigar Bliss and the exceptional Pro Palate system for people to get a better understanding for the perception, their senses, and we'll talk about all that. But without further ado, let me extend a very warm welcome, not just to all of you, but in particular to our special guest tonight, Mr. Nick Cutro.
Thank you. It's my pleasure to be with all of you.
The pleasure and honor, as always, is ours, Mr. Cutro. And what a journey it has been for you in the premium cigar world, in the premium cigar industry. And you took quite an interesting look at this ecosystem from many different angles. But what excites me personally, that like so many other cigar industry professionals, you're a musician, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, that's correct. Actually, that was my first career. I played music, and that's how I was introduced to the Dominican Republic. I used to play on a cruise ship, and we would port every Wednesday at Puerto Plata, which is about 1 hour from Santiago. So I would visit Santiago and got to know some of the factories, and that's how I started selling cigars for one of the manufacturers.
So I would love to ask you at the beginning, if the cigar world were an orchestra, which instrument would Nick Cutro be?
Wow, that's a loaded question. I guess I would be the viola.
Do you want to elaborate a little bit on that?
Oh boy, the viola is the instrument that's closest to the human voice, and I feel like when I smoke cigars, it takes me to the deeper part of my soul.
That's very interesting, and we spoke to many industry professionals about their musical careers before, and a lot of cigar men are either drummers like myself, or bass players, and what always struck me is that they're, even though they can be big egos, when it comes to their musical life, they probably play an instrument or a role where they're a little more in the background. And oddly enough, the way you experience the industry first and how you serve the industry is also a bit more of a behind the curtains kind of scene. What was it like for you to experience the industry as a broker, and then later on moving into your ventures of creating those cigar molds that you did for such a long time, and you still do, correct?
Yes, I do. Mm-hmm. Well, you know, when you're in the midst of doing something, a lot of times you just get caught up in the moment. And it wasn't until the last couple of years that I started to look back on how fortunate I was to be in that era before the cigar boom, and to live through the boom, and to come out the other end and experience the Renaissance in the early 2000s in Nicaragua. So I feel very fortunate, and part of that led me to writing the book, which I spent 3.5 years doing. So I had no timeline. It's self-published, which is the way I wanted it to be done. So I feel very proud of the book, and have been excited about the feedback that I've gotten from people.
You mentioned that you entered the industry at a particular moment in time, and well before all the glamour and the boom happened, and before the industry became what we know it as today. what was your feeling like in those early days when you first went to Dominican Republic, when you started as a broker? What was the shape of the industry?
It was very crude, in a sense that it was raw. Um, it wasn't an industry like the clothing industry or the automobile industry that's well developed. So it was being shaped by the players in the industry, and it was exciting. I had no idea that it would go in the direction that it went, and become what it has become. And I'm glad it did that, and rightly so. You know, cigars smoking is a luxury that those that partake in it understand how wonderful it is.
Would you say that it was the perfect moment in time for somebody to enter the industry with an ingenious idea?
Yeah, you know, as they say, timing's everything. Um, if it wasn't for where the industry was at that time, it would have ended up in a totally different place. So they say necessity is the mother of invention, and I believe that wholeheartedly. And also, yeah, necessity is the mother of invention.
With your role as a broker, did that give you a specific understanding of the industry that you would say was necessary in order to then go further into the cigar molds, the sensory endeavors, and everything that you do now?
Well, getting into making the equipment was something, a way to make income. And I was kind of tired playing on the cruise ships. So I saw it as a way to make a living doing something interesting. And cigar smoking is deep in my roots. My great grandparents came from Italy in the early 1900s to roll cigars in Ybor City, along with thousands of others from villages in Santo Stefano and Palermo. And then my grandmother and grandparents, they also rolled cigars. Yeah. And so cigars have been in our family since as far as I can remember. And so it was just it was an opportunity to do something that I was used to. I love the aroma of cigars. My grandfather allowed me to smoke cigars when I was 16. And he used to sell cigars from his soda truck. And yeah, so this was on my mother's side of the family, and he's Cuban. So I was always around cigars and realized that, you know, it was just part of life. My great grandmother smoked cigars up until her late 80s. She would smoke one Churchill a day. So I was always around cigars. So it just felt natural.
Yet it was the music that brought you to the Dominican Republic then. Did it ever feel like you were sort of rediscovering some of your roots once you went to Dominican and for the first time probably visited a factory?
Yeah, it did. It did have a interesting feeling to be around that. I never imagined I'd be in the cigar business. And when I started visiting the factories, it just felt like at home.
That must be a special feeling, I guess, when through a totally different path in life, you sort of come back to your roots. I pretty much discovered the same thing. I come from a very simple and humble background, but my grandfather was from a wine producing region, and we never had much as a family, but we had the family table where everything was shared. And I believe it gave me an understanding and an appreciation for the simple things in life and handcrafted things that are very authentic and real. Is that how you think and feel about tobacco as well?
Yes, absolutely.
Now, working as a broker though is probably a different ball game then. What side of the industry did that ultimately show you? Does it take away some of the mystique and some of that, that feeling of paradise that some people might have when they think about Dominican Republic and the Caribbean and the cigar industry in general, and suddenly you're faced with the harsh realities of business?
It did, yes. Yeah, so I'm not much into the glitz and glitter. So I'm not welcome to cigar parties and most cigar lounges because of just more of the nuts and bolts of the industry.
What was it then that inspired you to go into the mold and equipment side of things? Was it that wish to sort of be behind the curtains a little bit, but still provide the industry with something valuable and so important like a cigar mold?
Well, the company I was brokering cigars for needed equipment. And in the mid 90s, all the cigar molds were wood, and box factories typically made the cigar molds, or furniture companies, and they just couldn't make them fast enough. So the company told me that they wanted 1,000 molds made out of plastic to go back to the States, and don't come back till you have our order ready. So I went back to the States and talked to an older gentleman that was selling his machine shop. And I told him that I would purchase the shop at asking price, which got his attention, which told me that he was probably overpriced. But I told him one caveat: you have to stay with me for 1 year and teach me the machining business. So he agreed, and that's how I got into making the cigar equipment.
With a cigar mold, can you briefly tell us about the difference of what the industry had used for so many years, and then you started to produce the plastic molds? How does it change the process of manufacturing cigars?
Well, first of all, the wood molds that were made in the 70s and 80s were made with wood that was imported from Africa. It was slow growth, very super dense material. And in the 90s, that wood was no longer available. It was basically deforested. So the wood that they were having to use was not slow growth and is dense. So wood molds typically expand with a lot of humidity and contract with lack of humidity. Also, the way the wood molds are made is different than the way the plastic molds are constructed. The wood molds are basically made with routers, and with the plastic mold, they're made with CNC machines. So you have more precision. A typical mold has 10 channels. If you make the cigar molds with a router, each channel could be a little different. With a CNC machine, they're either all correct or all incorrect. So you don't have those fluctuations of humidity, and you have more consistency. And probably 90% of all the premium cigar molds are pressed in plastic molds today.
So I can only imagine the initial feedback from the industry must have been exceptional. Probably to some, was it challenging to make that switch because of, suddenly you're taking away an old tradition and you're replacing it with something innovative and new?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. And at first I felt bad that I was possibly taking jobs away from people in those countries. And one factory owner said, listen, you don't understand. When we order 200 or 300 molds, we have to return at least half of them because of the sizing isn't correct. He says, you're doing them a favor because they need to do what they do best. They need to make furniture that doesn't require precision. So you're not really taking anybody's job. So that made me feel better.
And then suddenly you find yourself turning the entire industry upside down, or changing the old and traditional for the better. How do you feel that the industry itself changed over those years? And do you think today the industry in general is more open to innovation and new ideas?
Oh, absolutely. And especially because a lot of factories now, the sons are involved in running the factory. And with that, they bring new ideas, and that helps the progression of the factory and the mindset of the fathers and grandfathers to be open to new things. And these are very smart people. People that own cigar factories and make premium cigars are very smart people. So once you can show them that something is more efficient, better quality, they're very quick to adapt it.
So with everything that you had experienced and the contribution that you made to the industry, one could probably imagine that you would write a book about cigar molds and how the industry has changed. Yet I find myself holding Cigar Bliss in hands with a subtitle of Demystifying the Art of Taste. How come?
Well, making cigar molds is hardware to me. And whether I was making cigar molds or boxes for jewelry or for jars, I didn't see making cigar molds as anything very special. It was just something that needed to be done. There was another company also in Pennsylvania that was making the plastic molds. So basically, that company and my company supplied 90% of all the cigar molds in the industry. And I just looked at it as a widget that needed to be produced. But with demystifying the taste, now that's where I think it required some artistic thought and challenged me in many ways.
Now, indeed, one of the first sentences in the book reads, "Cigars are a perfect balance between art and science." Have you always been deeply interested in that sensory art of the industry and what cigars mean on a sensory level?
Yes, absolutely. And my grandmother, who was a master cigar roller and rolled cigars in the factory, which is now owned by the J.C. Newman family. She was the cigar maker that would roll the samples. So she was considered one of the best rollers. But she was also a gourmet chef. And when I say chef, in her own home, but all the local restaurants used her recipes. She just was brilliant in the kitchen. So as a child, I was constantly surrounded by different tastes and aromas in her kitchen. And she used to tell me, she used to say, "Niquito, the women today don't know how to cook. So I'm gonna have to teach you in case you find a woman that you wanna marry and she doesn't know how to cook, then you can teach her." So as a young child, I said, okay, fine. So I was in her kitchen, which was strange for a young boy. Usually I was outside playing sports or climbing trees. So yeah, that was my first introduction to it. And then my grandfather used to always say that anybody that is close enough to smell the aroma wafting off of a cigar is lucky.
However, that it's quite a big leap from that childhood inspiration and what you had engraved in your DNA to mastering that art and the science of sensory. When did you realize this is something you not only have a personal interest in, but where you could also contribute on a professional level?
Well, during the cigar bubble, I was smoking cigars, of course, too many cigars in a day to really enjoy them. But I was having problems identifying those taste nuances that were mentioned in cigar magazines. And that was frustrating me because here I had already been smoking 15 or 20 years. And we usually described a cigar in three simple terms. It was either a bad cigar, a good cigar, or an extraordinary cigar. And when I started reading about the taste notes, I couldn't find them because I didn't have that sensorial language. So that got me to thinking, okay, I know that my palate is probably pretty much the same as most people, and that those notes are there. I just needed to have an association. And that's when I started digging deep and looking into the reasons why some people are able to find those taste notes and others weren't. And I found that people that came from the food industry, from the liquor, wine industry, they had a sensorial vocabulary. So they were able to make those associations.
You bring up a very important point there, that it's one thing to perceive something through your olfactory and the gustatory system, yet it's a whole different ball game to then verbalize that. Where do you think the industry sort of falls short on giving people a better understanding of how to not only describe a cigar, but probably also get the most and the best out of every single smoke?
In the last year or two, there's been a lot of good information that has come out. But there isn't a comprehensive manual that helps a cigar smoker develop their cigar palate. And I feel like Cigar Bliss does that in many ways.
So what, in your opinion, what would you say are those core elements that every aficionado or just any random person that is interested in appreciating fine wines and fine food, what are those steps we need to take in order to get into it?
Well, first thing is you have to understand there's three types of associations. One association is what I would call a neutral association, where there's very little emotional impact. For instance, you're around baking bread, but you're not crazy about the bread. You're not crazy about the environment where it's being baked. And then there's a very strong association where you have an emotional investment in it, where you're excited. Those associations stay with you forever, and they can take you back in time as far as many years as you have lived, and as many miles as necessary. And then you have negative associations where something negative happened during the time you were smelling this aroma. And those aromas are typically aromas you don't want to identify with and may have trouble finding in a cigar, a whiskey, or a wine.
So is the sensory component of cigars primarily leaning towards that emotional side, where we try to express what we perceive through the memories that we've made, through the particular moments and the people that we share those smokes with?
I think that's why cigar smoking is so enjoyable, because it allows you to do that. Also, man has always been infatuated with smoke. Just watching smoke drifting, it's almost meditative. So you have a couple of things going on there. It relaxes the mind. Then there's the nicotine component, and a lot of people don't know this, but nicotine causes your brain to produce dopamine, which is a feel-good hormone. And new research has found that for Alzheimer's and dementia, nicotine is wonderful. Those that consume nicotine on a regular basis, not overconsume, are less apt to suffer from dementia. And of course, the pharmaceutical companies jumped in, and now they're synthesizing nicotine to give to people in a pill. But you've probably witnessed many cigar connoisseurs live well into their upper years, and their minds are bright.
Let's probably start at the very beginning. When you speak with a fellow aficionado, I've realized that there can be two different sides of how people describe the perception. And one is probably the, well, I smell tobacco and I sense tobacco. And the other one is the other end of the spectrum, which I could probably call like the half wheel approach, where you're talking about roasted marshmallow on a sunny autumn afternoon somewhere in New England. how would you approach those two different kinds of people, and how can we make sure to bring them a little closer? Where does the beauty and the magic lie in the middle?
That's a challenging question. I would say you need to have a reference, something that we can say we can both agree on. If I may, I'm going to grab one of my bottles here from the Pro Palate kit. So in this bottle, there's a reference. And in this particular bottle, it's cinnamon. So we can all agree that this is cinnamon. If we don't, we can open the bottle and look inside and see that there's a piece of cinnamon. So when you smell this, if you think of pancakes, you have a reference that is flawed, because the cinnamon is reminding you of having pancakes at your grandmother's. But this is cinnamon, not pancakes. So once you have a reference, it's no longer subjective. Now it's objective. So I would like to say somewhere in the middle. And there are people that have extraordinary palates, just like in any industry. There are those that are just gifted. So is there a way to prove it? Well, yes, with a standardized kit. But I stay in the middle on that one.
How do you even start with defining what is that one thing we all could agree on? You brought up the example of the cinnamon, yet cinnamon can have so many different facets, and you rightfully mentioned it can mean many different things to many different people. Where do we find that one component that you could then present in a form like you do with Pro Palate?
I'm not sure how to answer that. So if we say leather, we have a jar with leather. This is leather. If it reminds you of something else, well, that's okay, but it's still leather. So universally speaking, we have to have accepted terms for certain associations. And now you can have intense cinnamon, a hint of cinnamon, a nuance of cinnamon, but there's got to be some source where that aroma comes from. So it's not subjective.
So would you then work with either like a science department at the university or a laboratory where you start to disassemble the different nuances and chemical components that ultimately make up what we all agree on as cinnamon?
Well, I think that would take the fun out of it. And then it becomes a science project, and you're not going to enjoy your smoking experience. So yeah, I see your point. Yeah, you can go too deep into things where it's no longer fun and enjoyable.
A very important distinction that you make there. So would you say that your approach has always been the fun component, and to still keep it approachable for the random cigar smoker and apasionado, more so than the scientific deconstruction of what a particular aroma might be?
Yes, I would. And I would say that falls back on making hardware. When you make hardware, you can't oversell it. It either works or it doesn't. If you make a Toro cigar mold and it doesn't make a Toro, it makes a Gordo, your customer's not going to be happy. So I've always been kind of the approach. It's got to work. It's got to be practical, and leave the artistic salesmanship to others. Some things, a lot of things are oversold, not just in the cigar industry, in all industries. It's done by clever marketing and clever use of words. And that's something that doesn't interest me.
We have a dear friend of yours joining us over on Facebook with the live stream, Damon. And first of all, he sends his regards, and I wanted to tell you that he says hello. He also had a question as to why do you believe that improving your palate is not just beneficial but necessary to the cigar lover?
Well, if you take someone that loves sports, the more they know about the sports, the more they enjoy it. If you take someone that loves music, they typically know who the musicians are, what their backgrounds are. So it just lends itself to, the more you know about something, you typically can enjoy it even more. Not getting to the point where you have to get into every detail, but knowing a lot about a subject helps you enjoy it even more.
And coming back to that music analogy, I always say that our senses are instruments of our multisensory orchestra, and only if it's conducted well and all these instruments play together in the most harmonious way, that's when the beauty of our sensory symphony will unfold. Why do you think that so many people never really start to explore the world of sensory and perception and become more in tune with their instruments, even though they are, you know, the most important components of our life and the instruments that we use on a daily basis?
I think technology is to blame for most of that. We've been bombarded with information, with noise. I was fortunate not to grow up in the technological world that the young people live in today, but I find that people usually that come from different eras have a greater appreciation for sensorial sensations and experiences.
So would we then just have to think about this differently when we approach the young generation? Because technology and what we live through now with social media and just the way we express ourselves nowadays has become the new normal. What would be your tip or your feeling on how we could do a better job in inspiring younger people to become more in tune with their senses?
I would say invite them to an outing, at a cigar lounge or your back porch, and introduce them to smoking a cigar slowly, talking about it, thinking about their smoking frequency, and maybe if you have them leave the phone inside. I tell young people, I said, this is our phone station. We don't allow the phones out on the porch. And they say, well, why is that? I tell them, I'll explain it to you later. So we get outside, we start smoking, and they forget about it. You know. So then now they slow down. The brain slows down, and then they start enjoying the experience. And many will have a strong enough experience where they want to continue doing that.
In that regard, do you think that the cigar, the humble cigar, as traditional and as old-fashioned to some people it might be, is the perfect product for our time?
I think it is. And then there's that nicotine component too that can't be overlooked. What I said earlier, nicotine causes the brain to produce dopamine. And this is why we're attracted to it. You can become addicted to nicotine also. However, if you're smoking 1 or 2 cigars a day, you're not addictive. You're just enjoying it, just like you enjoy eating, but that doesn't mean you're addicted to food. So there are some that become addicted to it. And but a cigar connoisseur is not addicted to the nicotine. It just feels good, and they enjoy feeling good.
Mr. Cutro, Cy Sweeney, our dear brother from Ireland, is here with us, and he had a fabulous comment, and I wanted to bring him in for a moment. Cy, welcome.
It'd be handy if I unmuted, wouldn't
it? Welcome, brother. Great to have you.
Talking to myself, Reinhard, as usual. Hello, Nick. How are you? No, I found it interesting there before you made the comment about Reinhard's question about the knowledge and stuff of cigars. But I find, like, just say if you had a teenager when they're young and they were passionate absolutely passionate about a sport or something, football, boxing, I don't know, anything that they liked, even if they might try their best to be the best at that sport, and they'll try it and they'll do, and their skill factor will come into it, whether they make it or not. And but even if they don't, they'll remain with that passion for the rest of their life, and they'll study their teams. They'll know what's going on in the sports or whatever, for example, or if their hobbies, dominoes, it doesn't matter, chess, they'll continue to follow it. And I find that with cigars, when I've smoked, well, I tried to smoke my first cigar when I was 14, but I nearly choked. But I'll never forget the texture, the aroma, just the whole idea. But I found with the COVID, before the COVID, actually, times were hectic, so I was smoking a few cigars a week, probably about 3 a week on average for, my God, 20, 30, 40, over 20 odd years, because I'm 53 now. But I found that with your passion, when you get a passion into it and you start to smoke some more and you get into it, it's always with you that you want the knowledge to learn more. And even the cigar history, as well as the taste, the notes and all that. I remember looking at the wheel years ago and going into supermarkets, trying out different spices, herbs, everything, different chocolates, just to try and get used to it. And some of it tasted horrid, but I did find some of them in the cigars. But I think that the more knowledge you have, not just to put out there, but that you have in yourself, you treat every cigar, because I smoke all different varieties from Cuban, non-Cuban, and I find every cigar an adventure. And I think to the day I can't smoke anymore, which probably will be the day I go in a wooden box, is when I'll stop trying to learn. And I think if you have a passion for something, you can have your relaxation, your enjoyment, but you can also take a few hours out of the week to just do a little bit of studying, you know what I mean? No matter how busy you are. And I find it fantastic. I find that and I think that if we teach young people, as you say, about if you can get them face to face, get them in, smoke a cigar, give them a little bit of the history of the cigar, of where it comes from, how, about the leaves and different leaves and everything like that, and just the pure enjoyment you can get for it, and how it's good for their mental health. I think that would help a little as well, That's all I wanted to say.
Thank you. Yeah.
And thank you.
So brilliant comment. And I would love to, if you don't mind, just dig a little deeper there, because you started to explain a little bit about how you try to evolve your own palate. How do you perceive with other people that join you for a leisurely herf, and the friends that you have around you? How do you all try to get into that sensory momentum and better understand what it is that you're perceiving and enjoying in fine cigar?
Well, I think that on your own, you can do it on your own easily enough. But I think with people and your mood, what mood you're in, if you're very tired, for example, and you've had a hard week and you sit down, you relax, you want a bit of music and you have a cigar and you can get things out of it. But I think when you're talking to people that you enjoy their company, and that I think everybody, just say if there was a group of 5, 6 people chatting, and we're all on the same wavelength, we're chatting about different things and we've interest in stuff, I think that your mood lifts up a bit more, you get a bit more euphoric, and the cigar tastes better, and you do tend to get, you'll get the compound flavors anyway out of most cigars, but you do tend to get extra little things. And then you can ask somebody as well, what are they getting out of something, if that you might have smoked last week, or you might have be smoking at the same time. And I think a lot of it is your frame of mind has a lot to do with it as well, you know what I mean, and your palate. I have a thing, as I said to Denise Leon one day about your palate. I always try, before I come onto a chat or anything like that, I have some water with some lemon, a light squeeze of lemon in it, maybe half an hour before, and then I don't eat anything. Just a half a pint of water with a few squeezes of lemon, and it does good for the palate and does things like that. So little things like that help me. And but I think over time you spot, I mean, if you smoke, just say you smoke something today, and you smoked it 12 months ago. Today you might actually get a few better notes out of it, depending on what humor you were in from 12 months ago. You know what I mean? And I have a little journal thing that I jot down little, the black book, I call it. I jot down little things that I find. And sometimes I can smoke the same cigars and I mightn't find the exact same thing I found the last time. So that's how I do it anyway. But I think good company, your mind, if you're in good company and you taste something, even if the chat goes on for 3 hours and you say, oh, look, I found this, you know, something here that I haven't tasted before, say hazelnut or something like that, or and you thought it was cashew the last time or something. I'll stick that in my memory, in the back of my brain. The next day or a few hours later, I'll write that down, that I found it in that certain cigar. You know, it's just, you know, our different spices are, you know, and it does help when company is good and when you're enjoying the cigar. You know, I know I'm Irish, but I don't like sitting there getting blind drunk and smoking a cigar, because I find that doesn't help with anything of the taste. You know what I mean? So
that's a brilliant point that you bring up there. And Mr. Cutro, I'm curious as to what's your opinion on company, because on the one hand, I believe it, as Sai rightfully mentioned, it can truly help you to frame and form your sensory database, because somebody else gives you an analogy and the reference, even though suddenly the component of preconception or influence might kick in. Whereas if somebody in your group brings up strawberry, suddenly everybody smells strawberry. What's the good and the bad in that?
Well, if you have the opportunity to sit down and smoke with people that are in charge of their palate, it's a wonderful experience. And there's a big difference in someone that's in charge of their palate and has a very artistic, a very creative imagination. So it could be good and bad. If you're with a group of serious cigar smokers, it's definitely good. And because somebody senses nutmeg, you look for it, but you don't have to agree to it. And I've done many, many workshops where I tell people, don't just agree. If you don't find it, let's get the jar of nutmeg, let's smell it, and let's go back and forth and see if you can find it. So if you're a serious student of learning to develop your palate, you don't just agree because it's out there. And smoking sometime in solitude is a wonderful thing. Many cigar smokers, your guest you had a few weeks ago, dear friend and mentor, Manolo Quesada, he loves to smoke in solitude. And my grandfather used to like to smoke in solitude or with somebody else that was quiet and didn't want to talk too much. And personally, I prefer to smoke in solitude. So we're all different. And it is wonderful to smoke with someone else that you're on the same wavelength with, where occasionally an idea will come up that you discuss, but you're not afraid to have silence while you're smoking.
Another quick thing I do as well is the you know, when people bring out like Cigar Journal or Cigar Aficionado and they bring out a list of 25 or 50 cigars, I'll look on the list and see which ones I can get hold of, and I get cigars every week. I'll order some cigars, but what I do, I don't read their notes on the cigars. I don't read what they say the cigar is going to. You know, I might say right, that's in the top 7, that's in the top 4, that's in. But then I'll go in to my garage, because I have my smoking area there or outside depending on the weather, and I'll just sit there by myself and I'll see what I can get out of that cigar, and then I'll smoke 2 normally, because I'll do one for mini reviews as well, and I'll smoke 2 normally, see what I got out of them, not in massive quick succession. And then I'll go back and I'll see, well, what is this cigar supposed to be made up of? Because it's like, you know, a little, because everybody that's on a panel that'll put a cigar into, say, number 5, number 4, number 3, they all have to get different tastes. They all have to get, you know, hopefully a lot of them might be on the same hymn sheet. Some people will waver off a little bit, but that's the way it goes. Same with judging, we do as well, that I do in the bodybuilding and fitness world. You know, we try to be on the same hymn sheet for different things. But I just find that way, and then I can say, oh, look, they got this, they got that, I got this, I didn't get that. Maybe I'll get that the next time. But I think it's excellent what Nick says. Don't agree with something just for the sake of it. You know, if you think that, if somebody comes around to you and says, oh wow, like JC Newman made a cigar and it's absolutely fabulous, I think it's this and I think it's that, and whoa, wow, and you try it and you don't get the same thing as them, don't say to them, oh yeah, that was a fabulous cigar. You know, just always be honest about it. You know, as I say, I never say there's a bad cigar, but I always say there's a cigar that may not suit my palate. You know, so I think honesty is the best thing in the industry as well. You know,
in the book, you shared so many stories and conversations that you had with other icons of the industry, and I'm curious, have you ever had any debates with them or encounters where you would wholeheartedly disagree with somebody you would think might have an educated palate and an excellent palate, or even considers himself a master blender?
Fortunately, that has never happened. Because we respect each other, we respect each other's taste. If you find something that I don't, that's okay, you know. So we're not challenging each other to see who has it. It's not a competition. So fortunately, that did not happen. It was a concern of mine for sure, but it didn't happen.
For those who probably never experienced Pro Palate system or haven't had it in their hands, can you walk us through the process that you would recommend for somebody to get in tune with the sensory system? What are those quintessential steps that you also try to convey through the Pro Palate system?
So the first thing is you have to have an association if you want to have a taste reference. So if you've never smelled cardamom, there's no way you're going to find that association or aroma in a cigar. If you haven't tasted or smelled nutmeg, there's no way you're going to find that. So the Pro Palate kit has a calibration board with 20 references. And in those 20 references, you can become familiar with 20 of the very common or most common taste associations in cigars. And then there's 5 references of tobacco leaf, 3 wrappers and 2 fillers. So first thing, you have to have a reference. The kit gives you a reference. Second is you have to calibrate your palate. Like I mentioned earlier, there's 3 types of references. Those that have a strong emotional impact, those will readily come to you. Those that have a negative impact, you need to change those, or you're never going to find those in a cigar. I had a gentleman that had hired me to help him develop his palate, and he was having trouble identifying certain taste nuances. So he had a magazine open, and he said, I want to smoke this cigar and find those taste notes. Is that possible? And I looked at the taste notes, and I said, it's very doable. The taste notes were leather, chocolate, coffee, very basic taste notes. And he was having trouble with leather. He just couldn't get the leather. So we talked further about his association with leather. I took the jar out and asked him to put his nose in the jar to get a really strong smell of leather and to tell me what he thought about when he smelled that. And he cringed for a minute, and he says, you really want to know? I said, absolutely, this is for you. He says, I think about my father's belt when he used to hit me. He says, whenever we misbehave, our father would say, go to the closet and take out the belt that you want me to hit you with. And so that reminded him of the belt, his father's belt. He says his father didn't abuse them. It was, it was a whack on the backside with your clothes on. And that was very common back in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. So he has this a negative association. So he just doesn't want to have that. He doesn't want to be reminded of that. So I asked him if he ever played baseball. And he says, oh, I love baseball. I said, do you have a baseball glove? And he said, yeah, I keep one in the back room. When my grandkid comes over, we play ball. I said, well, go get that. And I want you to bring it in here and smell that glove. And then take a puff of your cigar. And we did that a few times. And he was able to reprogram his association with leather, you see. So you have to have an association, and then you have to calibrate. After that, you need practice. And the associations that are weak, you have to work on those a little bit more. And what will happen is you're smoking, and then all of a sudden, on the fifth puff of the cigar, you're into the second, third, and these taste nuances just come to your mind, and you sense them, and it's very exciting. It adds another dimension to the smoking experience. And as you go further into the cigar in the final third, I tell people a great cigar is one that you continue to smoke until you almost burn your lips or your mustache. And typically at the end, all the oils get concentrated, and you start to pick up licorice notes, dark chocolate, espresso, and it just keeps developing. So having an association first, and then calibrating to those associations and exercising your palate, working your palate, keeping it in front of all the different taste nuances.
Mace is here with us, and he had a very good question as well. Brother, great to have you.
Hey, Reinhard. Thanks for another great show. And Nick, it's great to meet you, and great to see you. Really interesting chat. And I think it's one of those interesting things when we're talking about just picking up flavors for new people, for those of us who think we've been smoking for a while, still finding new flavors. And I guess I had a question, really, Nick, in that in your work across sort of dealing with different people and different clients, do you find that there are certain groups, maybe people from the Far East, let's say India, or from areas where perhaps dietary requirements or so what they're eating, spicy foods, hinders their palate, and maybe they have certain complaints about not being able to pick up on flavors? Or do you even find the converse, where maybe people are from different parts of the world where they don't get access to certain spices and they can't find the flavors? Is that something that you pick up on, that you maybe notice a pattern where from different geographic regions, what they have, what they eat on a daily basis impacts on that, and vice versa?
Interesting question. So I haven't had much experience with people from different countries, but I can just say in America, there's different areas where we eat different foods or eat different foods more often. And those that have a more diverse diet typically can pick up more taste nuances. If you're eating hot food to the point where you're burning your taste buds, that's not good. But if you're eating hot food, spicy foods, like Mexican people that I know can eat spicy food that I can't eat, but yet they're not burning their taste buds, and they're not drinking half a gallon of water like I would have to if I ate that much. And they have great palates. So your body adapts to the types of foods you eat, but the people that have the most diverse diets seem to be able to pick up the most taste nuances without training.
So I guess in short, what you're suggesting is get some more spices in your diet, and you'll pick up more flavor.
Different types of spices, especially those that are found in cigars.
Great stuff. Thanks, Nick.
You're welcome.
That brings me to another very interesting question. I just recently read an article in the spirits industry about super tasters and the phenomenon of certain people being more receptive to bitter components, for example, whereas a large percentage of the population probably is not even able to detect that. Have you experienced that phenomenon with cigar smokers as well?
Yes, absolutely. And actually, we have a DNA test kit in our kit, in the Pro Palate system. There's a DNA test kit to test your mouth taste sensitivity. And with that, the population is broken into 4 segments. and it's determined by the ability to taste certain chemicals. And this was discovered, the beginning of the discovery happened in 1930s at the DuPont Chemical Laboratory. There was a scientist developing a blue dye, and he was using a chemical called phenylthiourea. And he dropped it, and a puff of this powder went up, and his assistant breathed it and had a very strong reaction, but he had no reaction. So they started doing an experiment with the different scientists, and they found that only 1 out of 4 could taste this substance. And then in the 70s, Linda Bartochuk, who was a professor at Yale University, was doing research to find foods that cancer patients would desire to eat. People that are taking chemotherapy typically lose their sense of taste and their desire to eat. And she was doing this primarily for her father. And then she discovered that those that could taste this phenylthiourea, which is called PTC for short, had more taste buds than those that didn't. And in her preliminary research, she would actually count the taste buds of her volunteers. And she found that a super sensitive taster would have approximately 30,000 taste buds, where a normal taster would have 5,000. Big difference. And what it meant was that they taste the same things, but the intensity is different. So the way I applied this to the cigar industry is for you to understand what your DNA sensitivity is for mouth taste. So it's either normal, moderate sensitivity, sensitive, or ultra sensitive. If you're an ultra sensitive DNA, you're not going to like the same cigars that someone that's a normal sensitive. And the best example is a Connecticut, US Connecticut shade wrapper. Those leaves typically have a little bitterness in the mouth in the beginning. If you give it time, the bitterness will go away. Someone that is ultra sensitive will get turned off and not allow the other flavors to come through. So once you understand what your DNA is, you'll quit wasting your good cigars on a buddy that doesn't like anything that you give them.
Now the question then becomes, should we probably ask ourselves whether there are super smellers as well?
Well, there's no test to determine that at this point. I could say this though, you can use the Pro Palate kit to see how good your olfactory bulb is, because what's in those jars is in those jars. It's not subjective, and it's not somebody's opinion. So that's one way to test your palate, is to have references. You know, you could create your own. You have to make sure you can't see what's inside the jars.
What would be the average number of aromas that somebody who uses Pro Palate for the first time is able to pick up?
Usually it's not that good. I would say 50% is probably the best score, but after seeing what your options are, it improves rapidly. And within 2 weeks, you could go through the kit and get 90% of them right.
And how do you define then what goes into the kit exactly and which aromas you wanted to picture?
Well, I determined that by looking at all the cigar magazines and taking the most common taste references. For instance, we can all agree that coffee espresso is one of them. Caramel is one of them. Leather, cinnamon, black pepper, hay, fresh hay. So the most commonly used associations were used in the kit.
I would love to jump back to the mold side of your business for just a moment, because molds might probably give an indication as to where the industry is headed, in particular when you're supplying all the major manufacturers with different molds, you might get an indication as to which vitolas are trending and what people are leaning towards heavily. Do you see any particular novelties or evolutions besides the probably obvious enlargement of ring gauges over the past years?
You know, I could say that I would not be surprised if forthcoming you see longer cigars and the ring gauge is not getting any bigger, actually becoming more realistic in the 50 ranges.
Why do you think is that in particular with the longer sizes? And I mean, obviously in terms of ring gauge, if you're already up to a 9x90 or 8x80, there's not much bigger you can go. But how about the length?
I have no idea. I mean, personally, I like a longer cigar because usually it takes me a while before I really start enjoying it. And at that moment, I don't want to end it. Robusto to me is just way too small. And I hate to smoke a good Robusto because it's over before I'm finished.
Reinhold is here with us. Reinhold, thank you so much for joining us. And I believe you had a question or a comment. Welcome.
Yes, thank you. Nick, good to see you. Reinhold, good to see you. And good to see you. Back to the case. Nick, what I wanted to ask you is about the strength of a cigar. As you know, in Cigar Journal, we put a little, graphics in our tastings indicating the strength of the cigar, and we think of it as a nicotine strength, because full-bodied in aroma is full aroma cigars, and we like to taste full aromas, of course. So the strength of a cigar for us is usually nicotine strength. What is your approach about the strength of a cigar? When you talk about full-bodied, medium-bodied, or mild-bodied cigars, do you refer to aromas or do you refer to nicotine and the impact on your body? What is your approach in that? Because there's a lot of discussion going on in that matter.
Yeah, I agree. There's not a clear definition of either, and there should be. So mouth taste would be the viscosity of the tobacco. For instance, honey or cream is viscous. So that's body. Strength is nicotine. And I think too often those two are put together, and it doesn't really help someone in making a determination on what cigar they want to enjoy.
So when you talk about strength and nicotine strength, do you have like a variety how you would categorize cigars in nicotine strength? And what is the indication for you to determine, okay, this is strong in nicotine or mild in nicotine? What is your sensation that you can describe?
Well, for me, if I'm smoking a cigar on an empty stomach, then I have to compare other cigars to that same state. If I know I'm going to smoke a cigar that is the strength is up there, I make sure that I smoke that after I eat. But in order to make a determination, you need to smoke that cigar in the same state, either on an empty stomach or right after dinner, so you can have an accurate indication. And for me, when the strength is too high, I feel lightheaded, and it's not a good feeling.
Okay, one more. I'm sorry. One more question. Um, for me personally, I think I can determine the strength of the cigar when it comes to sweat on my forehead or increased pulse or stuff like that.
Yeah.
How do you determine that for yourself?
I try to stop before I start sweating. Be, once I start sweating, there's smoker's nausea coming on, and that's not pleasurable. So, and I find a lot of cigars today are too strong for me to smoke, and I don't enjoy one that's too strong in nicotine. It doesn't allow you to get into the cigar and do enough, allow enough to go through your nasal cavity to retrohale to pick up the taste nuances. Because if you're not allowing some cigar smoke to sneak through your nasal cavity, you're not going to pick up any of those flavor nuances that we all describe. So I think that's something that needs to be really explained better and to have a better understanding of, especially for new cigar smokers, because if you smoke a cigar for the first time and you get sick, chances are you may not go back to it, especially if you're middle-aged. You know, when we were young and we started smoking cigars, most of us got sick. But when you're young, you're willing to try things again. But as a mature person that has a bad experience may never give it a chance.
Okay, please allow me another question. There are several, in my opinion, very strong cigars on the market. And I would even name one, a Padron 1926 series. Pretty strong cigar. At the same time, the cigar is not overpowering in the sense that I won't feel any aromas anymore. No, it's balanced. It's very strong, but I can still distinguish all the flavors and aromas in the cigar. So there has to be some sort of a balance between strength and body of the cigar, where you are still able to determine all the flavors and aromas, and then you decide, okay, well, it's tasting great for me, but it's too strong, or maybe too strong, or not too strong. How do you balance that out?
You know, if I'm smoking a strong cigar that I'm enjoying, I just smoke it very easy. The other thing I'll do is smoke another cigar along with it. So I may smoke a lighter body cigar, less strength for a couple of minutes, and then go back to the stronger cigar, back and forth.
That's a very interesting point. Is that solely because you get another reference, so you can more easily categorize the two of them?
Yes. Yeah, typically I smoke 2 or 3 cigars at the same time, and I get the most enjoyment that way. And I don't smoke the whole 2 or 3 cigars each night. In Florida, because of our humidity, it's almost like a humidor in the Caribbean or Central America. So you can overnight cigars most of the time, and they're fine. A lot of times the stronger cigars will taste even better the next day or a few hours later. Gives them a chance just to release some of their strength.
Very interesting. Reinhold, thank you for your question. And Mr. Cutro, you mentioned retrohaling, which is also a hotly debated topic. In some of your recent interviews, I heard an interesting idea that as much as we all talk about retrohaling and whether or not you should do it or you actually do it, you sort of do on a daily basis anyway. Otherwise, you'd simply get sweet, sour, salty, bitter, and umami out of a cigar, right?
Correct. So we all do it. We're all experts at retrohaling. whether we know it or not.
So I
And then-
just wanted to share that perspective because I think it's such an interesting approach that people are probably not aware of.
And then knowing how much to let through, to allow, that's the key. You know, in order for us to distinguish an aroma, it's called the threshold. How many aroma molecules have to be present? Well, believe it or not, they say 1 part per billion with a B. And if you think about walking down the street, sometimes you can smell a restaurant that's miles away. You can smell aroma. You can smell coffee that's being roasted that it could be miles away. Or someone's using a fragrance pad in their dryer. And there's a billion inches of air between your nose and that source. So each person requires a little bit more, a little bit less, but learning how to allow the right amount is the key. And then that way too, you won't feel congested the next day. Some people that are obsessed with retrohaling are congested the next day because they're burning their olfactory bulb. They're burning their nasal cavity by forcing too much smoke through their nasal cavity. And when you experience burning, that is not a taste association. Burning is a sensation like touching a hot burner. Typically not desirable.
One other question that Mace brought up in the chat is your opinion on pairing cigars with certain drinks or even foods for an enhanced experience. I believe there's two different ways to look at it. One is pure enjoyment and whether or not you prefer to have a glass of rum or a specific type of juice with your cigar because you like it. And then the other one is what will be most supportive of an evaluation where you try to really detect all these sensory nuances.
So with pairing, there's two approaches. One is to create a more harmonious experience, and the other is to support the difference. So,
Contrast.
for instance, if you're smoking a cigar and you want the cigar to be the spotlight, then you don't want to have a beverage that's going to compete with those taste nuances. And Robert Parker was one of the first to really make us aware of this. Robert Parker is considered the godfather of the wine industry. Most people are familiar with him. Before Robert Parker, Americans drank European wine if they could afford it. But in 1978, Parker was at a international convention and he put California wines on the map. Now California wines are some of the most desirable wines in the world, and they're bold and big, heavy reds. So Parker used to say, if you want the wine to take the spotlight, you don't want the food to compete with it. But prior to Parker, the European philosophy was a dining experience was the wine and the food. So you wanted to have similar nuances, taste references that bounced off each other. Okay, so if you want the cigar to take the spotlight, choose a drink that actually refreshes your palate. So, for instance, if you're going to smoke a heavy full flavor San Andres wrapper, and you drink a heavy, smoky, peaty Scotch, they're going to compete with each other. So, if you don't want them to compete, drink a Scotch that is from the Highlands that's known for citrus and fruity notes. Try that and see if you like it. If you don't, then try something heavier. So you either compare to support or you compare to contrast.
And when pairing or choosing a beverage whilst you're trying to evaluate a cigar in your palate, then probably room temperature water is the only choice, right?
Only choice, yes.
Brian, our dear brother from California, you made it. Welcome, my friend.
Hello. Yes, I made it. Sadly, I have a new client, so I'm only able to jump on a full hour late. So I apologize if my question has already been covered. First of all, I love California wines. Second, Reinhard, I love your new background, wherever you are. It's lovely. I read when I read your email, when I read your email, Reinhard, I thought maybe this was the perfect person to ask this question. These are novice questions, just in terms of style. I mean, I'm trying to kind of get more educated and develop my palate and such. My wife was making fun of me. She's like, you have cigars all the time, but you're really not learning much. I'm learning a lot on the calls, but she's like, you should practice actually learning and like developing your palate. I'm like, I don't know, I'm learning a lot of stuff. I just want to enjoy it. But and it's dumb too, because I've been smoking since I was 16. So my ex-girlfriend's dad got me into cigars when I was 16. So it's an episode of Mythbusters. So maybe you can help with two things I've been told that I believed for a lot of years that are probably stupid. He said, if someone smokes a cigar like right from the front of their mouth, they don't know what they're doing. And if someone smokes a cigar from the side of their mouth, they really know what they're doing. That's the first one that hopefully you can clear up. And then the second one was, I was told that the quality of your cigar can be gauged by the amount of ash that you can have remaining naturally before it falls off on its own. And I believe that a lot when I was younger, and they started to call me long ash, my friends, because I would be doing that. So is that relevant or true? Thank you.
Brian, I think you just stunned Mr. Cutro with your questions.
Oh, that was for me to answer? Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, so both are false. If smoke from the side of your mouth, you're watching old movies too much. Okay, most cigar smokers don't puff from the side of their mouth. And secondly, the ash has nothing to do with the quality of the cigar. You may find a cigar that has tremendous flavor and the ash might be flaky. You know, the ash tells you the construction of the cigar. Also, it tells you the quality of the tobacco leaf and how long it was aged, but it doesn't tell you it's going to be a good cigar. I've had cigars that would have an ash 2 inches long that had no taste at all. I hope that answers your question.
Definitely. Cheers. Thank you.
Brian, many thanks for your question and jumping on. And no matter how late you join us, congratulations on your new customer. And I hope all is going well with the project. It's always good to have you. So before we wrap things off, Mr. Cutro, first of all, this has been such an enjoyable conversation, and I think there's so much value for all of us to take away from this, just to get our palate and our senses more in tune. So I'm really grateful for everything that you shared with us. But let's bring in Reinhold one more time. I believe he had another comment.
Thank you. Just following up Ryan's what he said, stupid question. I have another one. Nick, when you cut your cigar, do you think there's a difference if you V-cut, straight cut, punch cut your cigar?
Well, that could depend on how you smoke. Some people create a lot of, they like to get the head of the cigar moist. And if that's the case, the cut is going to be important, what you use. If you're using a V-cut and you like to keep the tip wet, you might have some problems. Where a guillotine cut allows you to have more surface area for the smoke to pass through.
What I meant is, did you ever encounter any difference in taste when you cut your cigars differently?
You know, I always use it. I always use it. Well, not almost always use a guillotine. When I used a punch or a V, I didn't seem to enjoy it that much. But I never did a scientific experiment where it was ongoing. It was just more of an intuitive thing for me.
Okay, because I assume everybody of your customers just bites the cigars, right?
No.
That's what the manufacturers do, in my.
Oh, my customers, I see.
Yeah.
Not, no. Now for a quick, if they can't find their clipper, yes. But when they're enjoying a cigar, no. Biting the cigar, you're never going to get a clean cut. You're going to have tobacco in your mouth. It's going to taste, it's going to kind of confuse your palate. When they're tasting cigars, they're very careful the way they clip their cigars.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
The industry is booming right now, and people, after the uncertainty of the COVID-19 pandemic last year, suddenly experienced a dramatically increased demand and appreciation for fine cigars. When you take a glimpse into the crystal ball with me, Mr. Cutro, are you bullish or bearish for the near future of the cigar industry?
I'm very bullish, and we often have this discussion. You know, what's causing this mini boom? Is it pent up demand? And I would argue that it's not. I would argue that there's more people that are enjoying and discovering the pleasures that we get from smoking cigars. During the coronavirus, you still bought cigars, you still smoked cigars. What we're seeing in this mini surge, there's just new cigar smokers discovering cigars, and it's almost feeding on itself. A lot of actors and sports figures are smoking, which is telling the younger generation it's okay. You know, it's okay to have an occasional cigar. So I think it's new cigar smokers, and I think it's great for the industry, and it's just going to continue.
And even better, if we can provide all those new cigar smokers with such a wonderful educational tool like the Pro Palate system and the book Cigar Bliss, in order for all of us to better understand our sensory instruments and how to better use them in order to better enjoy our smoking experiences. What a wonderful and most inspiring conversation. Next week, for all of you, my dear friends, we'll have Oscar Valladares joining us for an intricate talk about Leave by Oscar and his journey with cigars. So please make sure to join us again next Wednesday. And before we ultimately wrap things up, Mr. Cutro, my last question brings me full circle to where we started with our music analogy and your background in music. Our life is like a song sometimes, and I'm very curious as to where do you think, in which part of that song you are right now?
Well, you ask philosophical questions, which is interesting. I wrote a song called Our Run in the Sun. And what it talks about, a young child is introduced to the world and sees nothing but undiscovered horizons, and is so full of joy and never thinks about running out of time. And then as the child gets older, becomes an adult, they start to think about their time on their planet Earth. And as they move into their senior years, they start to realize that all these memories, they become condensed, more and more condensed. So the song at the end, I would say I'm in Our Run in the Sun. I'm in the middle of my run right now.
Brilliant. Plenty more to come for sure. Thank you so much for this wonderful session and for all your insightful answers. It's been an absolute joy and pleasure to have you. Mr. Nick Cutro, many thanks for being with us at the Light 'em Up Lounge.